what attracts you to San Francisco is the creativity, is the openness, the minds, just the willingness to be zany and creative, which is what San Francisco represents, or at least in my head. It's frustrating to see it transition to more of a moneyed place where it's about the bottom line rather than the beauty of the place.
That was photographer Doug Salin. I'm Jeff, and this is Storied San Francisco. In this podcast, Doug digs deeper into his family's history. His great-uncle went by the name Wolo, and in the 1920s and 30s, did his art from a home base in North Beach. This attracted Doug's dad to make the move west, which he did. Soon enough, Doug's parents met, got married, moved to Marin, and had kids. Doug talks about growing up in Marin, going to college in Santa Clara, and moving to San Francisco, which he recounted for us in part 1. He ends this episode with his thoughts on what it means to still be here in San Francisco. Here's Doug.
No, my father was, he had been moving around Germany at that time. His father was, my grandfather was a professor of economics and worked at various, I want to say, colleges, universities. And so they settled in Basel, Switzerland. And so he, after the war, there was a lot of tension during the war, and there was a lot that contributed to my father being who he was. But one of the things that impacted him probably greatly over his life was that all of his friends died in the war.
Right.
So he had family, and his family survived, but all the close people that he grew up with, none of them survived. And many of them were involved with the various aspects of trying to get rid of Hitler. So they were
Resistance. What are they? What were they called?
There was a huge plot to murder Hitler, and my father's father and all of their friends were involved in that to a pretty high degree.
And your father was in Frankfurt, or?
He was born in Heidelberg.
Oh, yeah.
And then during the war, I guess he'd moved around to a couple of different places in Germany, but through the war, he was in Switzerland.
Okay.
So he grew up in Switzerland, but he would tell me stories about taking a gun to school, that he was always worried that the Nazis were going to show up, and they were clearly on the list of people that they were looking for.
That's got to be traumatizing also, but
it's enough. I mean, it's enough to give you pause. I mean, so, and people who would be visiting his father, who was also running things back and forth to Germany whenever he could.
Okay.
However he could, that they were doing things that were not necessarily going to do them well.
Right.
But things happened. So he comes to the United States, to New York. I don't believe he went to Ellis Island. So he does not have an Ellis Island story.
Do you know how old he was?
He came, I want to say he came in 1946, perhaps.
Okay.
So he would have been 22.
Okay.
Perhaps 22, lands in New York.
I mean,
becomes an editor for the Academy of Sciences. He was an editor.
Oh.
So my dad was highly educated, spoke, probably 5 or 6 languages, wrote, 2 or 3 languages.
When you say editor, you mean of words?
He was an editor of some journals.
Science journals,
for the, Academy of Sciences.
Got it.
That he had done some things. But he was his father kind of referred to him as sort of a playboy. Okay. That he was very, very fashionable, very elegant, very very posh kind of is how he presented himself, and that's just kind of sort of his roots.
Less of a Zionist than his.
He was actually raised more Lutheran.
Okay.
His father was Jewish, but his parents divorced when he was very young, and his mother left his father with the 2 kids, because I think in those days the parental rights referred more to the
default
father,
to the mom.
To the father.
Oh, to the father. Okay.
In Germany, I think.
But his mother
left, which gets to a little more interesting side of the family because my grandmother, I just knew her as Grammy Charlotte, but she was also by birth, she was, her last name was Trutchler von Falkenstein.
Okay.
So she, I get it confused, but that was her birth name. We're getting there. And it's interesting because after she divorced my grandfather, who was Salin, she married the Count Fink von Finkenstein.
Okay.
So all of my mail to my grandmother was addressed to the Countess Charlotte Fink von Finkenstein.
Okay.
Which I thought that always was very interesting.
Fun. Yeah.
You know, but her brother had emigrated to the U.S. in the 1920s.
This is your dad's uncle now.
My dad's uncle.
Okay. In the 1920s.
In the 1920s.
Okay.
And he landed in Minnesota, Wisconsin,
Okay.
to study animal husbandry. But he had been raised in a military family, and he was to become a military person in, Prussian sort of Aryan whatever. And he didn't want to have any part of it. And he
Good call.
He was an artist. He could draw with either hand. He was ambidextrous. He was a wonderful storyteller, and he was a puppeteer.
Oh, yes.
So, and he landed in North Beach.
Oh, okay.
So, and
this is your great uncle.
my great uncle. So
Okay.
my father's great uncle was a gentleman named Wolo.
Okay.
Now his full name was 9 different names. Baron
Von
Anton Wolf.
something. Mhm.
Trutchler von Falkenstein, but he went by the name of Wolo. And never wore shoes, only wore sandals. Wore necklaces. He wore. He was a fixture of North Beach,
Okay.
and he was.
And this is the 20s, you said?
This is in the 20s and 30s.
Okay.
And he did some WPA work in the Central Valley. I have some drawings that he produced.
Oh, wow.
Of some camp workers and beautiful work.
Mm-hmm.
So he was, doing whatever he could as an artist to get by. He also did caricatures. And for a time, for several years, I don't know the exact length of time that he did it, but he occupied a space in the Chronicle that was later occupied by a guy named Herb Caen.
Okay.
And so his space in the Chronicle was a caricature of the day, let's call it, a vignette of the day, of a picture, of a scene, of a person in San Francisco, and the column was called "I Saw You There," and the Chronicle would give you some sort of prize or something, or frame it or whatever.
Guessed what it was.
If you recognized either yourself or the scene, or I think it was a person.
Okay.
And he would do this,
But not newsworthy necessarily.
It wasn't
just,
news.
Just
it was
whatever.
It was just
around town.
purely a fun thing.
Yeah.
I saw you there,
Okay.
and if you went down to the Chronicle's office, you could collect your prize or whatever it was and he did it every day for years. And there are tons of these. You could look it up in the old Chronicles to find.
And he did all this under the name Wolo?
He went by Wolo, Wolo.
Okay.
And he would usually sign it based on the year. So in addition, he and most people who have been here in San Francisco long enough will remember a restaurant called the Hippo.
I've heard of the Hippo for sure.
The Hippo was on Van Ness,
Van Ness, yeah.
around Greenwich maybe.
Okay.
And he did all of the artwork
For that restaurant.
for the Hippo restaurant.
Okay.
Including the sign, which was a big pink hippo.
Hippo, right.
So
and he did that.
The hippo's name was Petunia Bilgebottom.
Mm-hmm.
And he always had interesting names. And Wolo had a very heavy accent, extremely heavy accent. But he did that. He did the Pizza restaurant in North Beach. He did murals there. He did the new Pizza. He also did murals in many of the children's hospitals around the Bay Area. So he, over the years, he would just volunteer and do these murals. I'm assuming he got paid, but all the children's awards and like Palo Alto, you can still find greeting cards of the walls of the Palo Alto Children's Hospital.
Awesome.
You can still find copies of those cards. He did a series for one of the local creameries. He did a series of, let's call them pogs, or the bottle caps for the milk bottles.
Right.
Of his caricatures, of his creatures.
Awesome.
He did a series of children's stories that you can still find on eBay.
Like as books?
Published books.
Wow.
And he wrote the stories and designed and illustrated did all of the artwork, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful artwork. You can still see today some glimpses of some small pieces of his artwork every time you walk into Vesuvio's.
Oh.
His artwork.
Where can you be more specific, please?
At the entry to Vesuvio's, the first thing you see, the first door. If you're standing at the front door and you look around the perimeter of the front door, those are his drawings.
Awesome.
So,
does he have anything to do with why your dad came here?
So my dad came to San Francisco. I think I don't know if he was sponsored by Wolo, but he came to work with Wolo. So he became
from New York.
So Wolo in North Beach also had, among other things, for a time he had a toy store. Oh. And the toy store was called Happy Things.
In North Beach?
In North Beach.
Okay.
With a swing outside that you could sit on. And at any rate...
Happy Things?
Happy Things.
That's a great name for a toy store.
Happy Things.
That's kind of the best name ever for a toy store.
He just knew that, he was a playful person.
Did he have a family of his own?
He had a couple of children.
Yeah.
A son and a daughter. His spouse, I want to say she was highly, almost what we would call Christian.
Okay.
So she had very serious, strong religious background and beliefs.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure I think there was a clash there. And I think that
I can see it.
that as the kids tended to be, I think they were divorced and the kids were raised in a much more ecumenical sort of background, Christian background.
These would be your dad's cousins.
These are my dad's cousins, correct?
Got it. Okay.
And they lived in Southern California, I believe. And
so nevertheless, your dad did come out here
to be around Wolo and to work with him.
To live with also?
I think he was. My dad was living on Montgomery Street, in North Beach. I mean, I have the address right here. It's so funny because I was there was a famous poet who died recently, Ruth Weiss, and they published where she used to live in North Beach, and I said, God, that number's very familiar. And so I had just been given a pile of business cards that my dad from where he had lived. And one of the business cards was exactly this. Here it is. It's 1010 Montgomery Street.
Okay.
And there was the same address that Ruth Weiss had lived in the maybe late 40s and early 50s. And I wonder if they'd known each other.
Right.
Because here's this building with multiple German-speaking people living in.
Right.
And I'm just curious as to what that building represented.
What was your dad's name?
His name was Lothar.
Salin.
Lothar Norbert Georg something other, Wolfgang Salin. He had everyone in my family had 9 different names.
Right.
It's a long process.
So we said probably your parents met in North Beach, and now it makes a lot of sense. Do you know the story?
My mother, I would typically call a Bohemian.
Okay.
And at that time in the 40s, late 40s, North Beach was quite a place for Bohemians.
Yes.
And so she would have gone to art openings. She would have gone
preceding the beats.
Pre-beat. And she would have gone to poetry readings. My mother was a poet. She wrote poetry. Oh. She was an artist. She did paintings. So Wolo would have been someone that everybody knew in North Beach. And here's Wolo's Wolo's nephew, who dresses like someone
Playboy.
like Playboy, GQ, very sophisticated. My mother, who grew up reasonably well off in San Francisco is got to be attracted to this guy that's got everything that she's looking for.
Sounds like that happened.
So, and he drove a sports car and, I mean, it's like, okay, so it's like, this is kind of, this was meant to be. I don't know. Again, I don't know how they met.
And then I know you have at least one brother. Are there more siblings or is it just the two of you?
So they got married and my dad was he was doing some printing and let's call it print brokering or, just print coordinating for publication. And they got married and moved to San Rafael. And her father helped set him up in business with a printing company. So for the next 20 years, he was a printer.
Okay.
And
did he work in the city or up there?
No, worked in San Rafael.
Okay, got it.
But my mother was his delivery person, and so the binderies for things were in San Francisco.
Right.
So she would haul me and sometimes a sibling, and we would come into San Francisco on a regular basis to go to the binderies that were, the printing houses that were huge in San Francisco. And the one we went to was one called Cuthbert's, I remember, and it was near, what would become the Ice House. In sort of that Broadway and Battery area with a lot of printing companies. And I remember her driving into the city all the time. And
do you remember growing up across the bay, across the gate, actually? Do you remember your first, or I guess I should say, what were your earliest memories of coming to San Francisco?
Well,
was it that?
That was part of it. Usually, the earliest memories are going to Playland at the beach. And
do you ever eat those enchiladas everyone talks about?
I was going to get to the hot house.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Because
something about maybe it's lunchtime and enchiladas just
more
excite
so me. Than Playland at the beach were enchiladas at the hot house.
Yeah.
And that is the number one memory of my childhood.
Awesome.
Everything revolves around.
Have you ever had enchiladas to rival those?
No.
Yeah.
No.
And we're talking how many years ago?
We're talking
50?
early 60s.
60 years ago.
Yeah. Early 60s.
You're not the first person to tell me that, by the way.
They did relocate up on Balboa. I think they had a branch up on Balboa after Playland closed, and I remember going there. Again, same
enchiladas.
But just standing in line in the hothouse while they put the onions and just prepared your enchilada, the sauce. I have vivid visual memories of that entire process that I can't shake.
Right.
It was that powerful.
Right.
Yeah, it was nothing like it.
Yeah.
It's pure, simple food with a little, gingham cardboard, container with a piece of wax paper and, and I don't know if it was a plastic fork or I don't know how they served it.
It didn't matter.
How did you eat it? I don't know, but it was brilliant.
Yeah.
And then you'd have your enchiladas and then you go play in the hot house and hopefully not throw up. But the play, going to the fun house at Playland was every kid's dream. And we did that a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a little. My mother, her family is also related to the family that runs the Museum Mécanique.
Oh yeah.
So those are related families, and
I'm hoping to get them on next season.
Good.
Yeah, because we're doing places next season.
Yeah, so she would hang out and go and visit her cousin there, and
Yeah.
we'd go hang out and play with the machines.
Yeah.
Usually my sister and I, and sometimes my younger brother.
Like from what age? How young were you?
I would say probably 6,
Yeah.
6,
Wow.
7.
Okay.
And she would go hang out at the De Young Museum, and we would run around all the armor, in the De Young, and we just making noise, and she'd be doing something, and we'd be running through the museum, or walking through the museum, but the experience was somewhat cultured in art and seeing stuff and cool stuff. So it wasn't necessarily learning it from a book. It was seeing the real things.
As a kid, did you feel that coming over the gate, that it was different here than where you lived? Or was it just, it's where you live? I mean, I don't know that kids think that sophisticatedly, but maybe, I don't know.
I've always been sort of a self-starter.
Okay.
I've always had a level of curiosity of the things around me. I remember when I was in kindergarten starting back in kindergarten, that I was fascinated by the mailman. He was really the coolest guy I knew. And every day I would deliver the mail with him.
Oh.
So, he'd come by our house and
From there,
I delivered the mail until he got to school. And then I went to kindergarten.
Yes.
But it gave me something to do. I hung out with this guy.
Yeah.
He was sort of my first mentor, was walking around the neighborhood in San Rafael until we got to the old school that I went to. And I found that an interesting sort of thing to do. I mean, by the time I was 8, I had my first like 3-speed bicycle. Mm-hmm. And what do you do at that age? You take it apart. Mm-hmm. I took my bike apart because I was curious about how it worked.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to figure out how to put it back together. But it took, I really.
But you'll learn.
But I did learn.
That'll learn you, as they say.
I finally got it back together, so I had a bike. And then when I was 6 or 7. When I was 8, my older brother Tony got a newspaper route.
Okay.
And I'm like,
up in San Rafael?
Up in San Rafael.
Yeah.
And downtown San Rafael. And I said, well, that's cool. How come I don't have a newspaper route? I'm 8 years old. I'm in 3rd grade. Mm-hmm. And so I complained to my parents, and they told the IJ, and the next thing I know, I got a paper route.
At 8.
At 8 years old. I'm in 3rd grade, and I'm delivering newspapers.
Yeah.
It's like, why not, right?
Right.
I mean, what every 8-year-old does. And my newspaper route was downtown San Rafael. Ooh. So I did from what was C Street down to Lincoln Street in downtown San Rafael, which included Macy's. I delivered to the courthouse. I delivered to the businesses, and every day I was around these business people. I could buy ice cream sundaes. I could take a break in the furniture store. I could talk to the guy that repaired typewriters. So it was highly mechanical. There was even a guy that made furs, and I'd go hang out with him. So I grew up around all these people who were making stuff and doing things, and everything from businessmen to actual inventors and makers and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I interacted with them on a daily basis.
You mentioned San Jose, which is where you went to college. Right?
Yes.
What was that decision? And
that was, well, again,
and what was that transfer? What was that move like for you?
I was never a really good student, but I was never a really bad student. Mm-hmm. Because I think
B minus.
Probably
B minus, yeah.
But I tested well.
Okay.
I was really good at guessing on tests, I think. So I had a really great SAT score, mm-hmm. which opened a lot of doors to me.
Okay.
Because my grades, my grades from the time I was in high school were pretty good for the last couple of years. But I mean, I never took an AP course. I was never in any sort of advanced anything. I was always in the average sort of class.
Okay. But
for some reason, my grades were always good enough, and my scores were really good, and so my counselors, said, well, what the hell? So I went to school down in the South Bay at Santa Clara.
Okay.
A fine Jesuit institution. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot of good things to say about the Jesuits and their education. It's outstanding.
Right.
And they did.
I live over by USF.
And they did a lot for me, and I'm very, very grateful of that experience. But that was, but San Jose was not San Francisco.
No.
And I had one of my memories in Santa Clara is that I borrowed a friend's car, drove up to San Francisco for the night because that's what you did. And this is like 1974, and there's a gas crisis on.
Yeah.
And I didn't have enough gas to get home.
Okay.
And you couldn't get gas if it wasn't your day to get gas.
Rationing
was in play, and I had to figure out how to get gas into his car to get home. And my sister was dating a young man at USF.
Okay.
Who she married, and they've been married forever. Michael and
literally
Pat, my
forever.
sister Pat.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, I think she's visiting him at USF. And I drove around the streets at USF and I saw her car. So I go, okay, she's here. So then I had to go track her down because I didn't know what dorm she was in.
Where?
I tracked her down and said, "Can I siphon some gas out of your car?" And in those days, you carried a hose with you,
Right.
Because if you were stuck, you couldn't get gas.
I love that you asked, though, instead of just doing it, because you
did
found her
ask.
car first.
I knew that she was there.
You
I
asked.
located her.
That's respectful.
And I was able to get enough gas into the VW of
Yeah.
my friend Jack and get back to Santa Clara.
I love it. So that's a great story. You're in San Jose. You already told the story of coming up and working in photography and Macy's and everything. But in just a couple minutes, I mean, there's the rest of your life. So like, is there anything important, or like just like one?
Well, no. Being at Macy's at the time I was there, I learned a lot about problem solving. I learned how to be confident and how to do things that you had never done before. Often people are always looking for people with experience. The process of photography is often doing something you've never done before in a way you've never done it, and having enough confidence to be able to get through it and ask people for help, and then trust your instincts and then pull it off. You're flying by the seat of your pants a lot of times, but once you learn how to do that, you can have really incredible results. So Macy's taught me how to see light and how to design an image.
And then you eventually went on your own.
Yeah, eventually I became my own photographer and didn't do that kind of work anymore. I specialized in architectural lighting, but the background of understanding lighting from zero gave me all of the knowledge I needed to apply it to large architectural spaces.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. However long you want to talk about this is up to you. We did it with Kim. We're doing it with all the guests this season. Our theme is We're Still Here. Speaking to all the changes, gentrification, now the pandemic, all the challenges of living in San Francisco, you, if I may, are very much still here. I just toured your garage right below us, and that thing ain't going nowhere. And neither are you. So I want to hear, what does that mean to you, Doug?
There's definitely an anchor here. I've got a pretty big anchor.
There's probably literally an anchor down there somewhere.
Yeah, I've got that too.
Yeah.
It's frustrating. It's extremely frustrating. What attracts you to San Francisco is the creativity, is the openness, the minds, just the willingness to be zany and creative, which is what San Francisco represents, or at least in my head. Mm-hmm. It's frustrating to see it transition to more of a moneyed place, mm-hmm. where it's about the bottom line rather than the beauty of the place. Mm-hmm. So as I drive around and I see things becoming gray, as I see the painted houses losing their color, and I see it becoming more and more drab, I would be happy if it would just become the colorful city it used to be. And that's where it has lost it for me, is that the color is going away. And the people who are here don't understand just how vibrant and colorful it once was.
And expressive. And right.
And all I can do is sit in a corner and go, well, we used to have that all over.
And for listeners, I will get a photo of your house. Your house speaks volumes to what exactly you're saying right now, so they'll see that. But
I mean, it's not shades of gray, it's color, And the person who comes to mind when you were driving around the city 30 years ago was Bob Buchter,
who's been on the podcast, by the way.
Yeah. And you look at his houses that he did the color, and you go, yeah, that's so cool. That's why I live here. And you go to other cities, you don't get that.
Right.
Houses are white.
It's unique to here.
It's unique to San Francisco that there was this opportunity for refreshing color everywhere. And the people embraced it all the time. Mm-hmm. And there are still people here who embrace it all the time. There's a lack of experimentation. Let's say we go back to the 60s and it was all about free love and experimentation. People are worried about their future.
Mm-hmm.
People are worried about their job.
Mm-hmm.
People are worried about, the image that they portray,
Mm-hmm.
Who they are. And it's like, you can still do all that and still be expressive and creative and colorful. And it doesn't have to be only 3 colors in your paint box. You can have the 64 color Crayola set and go to town with it. That's the city I want to see. I want to see a colorful city. I want to see a vibrant city, but I want people to embrace the fact that color does exist.
That was Doug Salin. The next episode of Storied San Francisco will be the final podcast of Season 4. Get to know Caitlin Galloway and learn all about the Greenhouse Project out in the Portola. Episode 49 drops next Tuesday, wherever you listen to podcasts. Music for the podcast was produced, performed, and curated by Otis McDonald. Original photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. Aaron Lim of Bitch Talk Podcast is our contributing producer. And the show is produced and hosted by me, Jeff Hunt. Now in our 4th season, we have more than 190 episodes available on our website, storiedsf.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can, please rate and review our show so we can reach even more folks. We love email. Drop us a line at storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay strong, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time on Storied San Francisco.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.